My son banned me from his wedding, yet had the audacity to send me a bill demanding $75,000 to cover his luxury reception and honeymoon in Santorini. He even scribbled a note telling me I should be grateful for the chance to contribute. I sat in my Charleston kitchen staring at the papers, anger twisting slowly into calm determination. He thought he had humiliated me, but all he had done was hand me the perfect reason to dismantle his fantasy piece by piece. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if your son excluded you from his wedding but then sent you a massive bill to pay for it? My son banned me from his wedding, yet still had the audacity to send me a bill demanding $75,000 to fund the whole affair. The envelope sat heavy in my hands that morning, thick cream paper with Daniel's neat handwriting across the front. I had been sitting in my Charleston kitchen, the October sun sliding weakly through the blinds, when I opened it. I had thought, foolishly, that it was an invitation. After months of silence, I half expected him to write a note, maybe even ask me to walk him down the aisle as we once joked about when he was a boy. Instead, the envelope spilled a stack of papers across my table. They were crisp, itemized bills printed like a corporate invoice. The numbers hit me like a punch. $50,000 for the coastal venue with its sprawling lawns and glass ballroom. $15,000 for catering, with a menu of imported wines, oysters, and champagne fountains. $10,000 for a honeymoon suite in Santorini, an overwater villa that seemed pulled from a travel magazine. And at the bottom, in Daniel's slanted handwriting, a note. Dad, after all the problems you have caused, consider yourself fortunate that I am letting you contribute. Send the funds quickly. Lauren and I are counting on it. I read it twice, then 3 times, each word cutting deeper. Problems. That was the same word he threw at me during our last argument, as if my modest life was a burden he carried like a weight around his neck. He had blamed me for not chasing promotions harder, for not leaving Charleston to take bigger engineering contracts in Atlanta or New York. He had blamed me for the quiet life I built after his mother died, the same life that gave him security when everything else fell apart. My hand shook as I set the note down. On the corner of the table sat a photo of Daniel at 12 years old, gapped smile, holding the wooden birdhouse we had built together. His hands had been splintered from the sandpaper, his eyes bright with pride. That boy was gone. In his place was a man who saw me not as a father, but as a wallet. I pushed away from the table, pacing across the small kitchen where the walls seemed to close in. The air carried the faint smell of coffee I had brewed earlier, bitter and cooling in the mug by the sink. My knees protested each step, but I forced myself to move. If I sat still, I would crumble. I splashed cold water on my face and gripped the counter until my knuckles whitened. For years, I had worked double shifts after Elena passed, taking overtime so Daniel could have braces, music lessons, and a chance to attend college without debt. I had sold Elena's jewelry to cover tuition. I had taken a second mortgage when Daniel wanted to launch his first business, a failure he never mentioned anymore. I had done all of this quietly, without complaint, because that was what a father did. And now he barred me from his wedding because Lauren decided I would embarrass them in front of her colleagues and wealthy family friends. I returned to the table and smoothed the invoice flat again. The arrogance in his words stung more than the total cost. Be grateful that I am letting you contribute. That was the way Lauren spoke too, her tone sharp and dismissive the last time I saw them. Last Christmas, I had arrived at their downtown apartment with a tray of tamales Elena had taught me to make, only for Lauren to wrinkle her nose and whisper into Daniel's ear. He smirked at me and said they were vegan now, as if that justified pushing me back out into the cold after an awkward exchange at the door. I had driven home that night past the glittering lights of Charleston Harbor, the tamales untouched on the seat beside me. That memory burned again now, fueling something hotter than grief. My eyes went back to the pocket watch resting near the stack of papers, a family heirloom from my father. I picked it up, felt the cool weight in my hand, and listened to the steady tick. It had survived 3 generations of work, sacrifice, and quiet dignity. Daniel's note, with its mocking tone, was the final insult to everything that watch represented. For a moment, I felt sorrow pressing down like a tide. But then, as the ticking filled the silence, the sorrow shifted into something sharper. My lips curled into a bitter smile as a plan began to form. He thought he had humiliated me, but what he had really done was given me a reason to act. I sat down again, pulled my old laptop toward me, and wiped the dust from its lid. The screen glowed to life with a familiar hum, casting a faint blue glow across the room. I opened the browser and typed Daniel's name into search engines. His accounts were private, as I expected, but Lauren's were wide open. She loved flaunting her life. I scrolled through endless photos of designer bags, wine tastings, and their announcement about the wedding venue. One post caught my eye. "So excited for our big day at the East Bay estate," she wrote, tagging the location. The caption sparkled with emojis, but my focus stayed on the date. November 15th, only weeks away. She even added a link to their honeymoon package in Santorini, a perfect postcard escape. They were confident everything was locked in. Too confident. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The house was quiet except for the tick of the pocket watch and the faint creak of the old floorboards. Outside, the wind stirred leaves across the yard, dry and brittle, scattering in all directions. My anger settled into cold determination. This was not about money anymore. It was about dignity. Daniel and Lauren wanted me gone from their lives while still feeding off my sacrifice. They believed I would cave because I always had. Not this time. This time, I would teach them a lesson they would never forget. As I sat there, my phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with Daniel's name. For a moment, I froze, staring at it as the vibration rattled against the wood. I reached for it slowly, my pulse steady now, ready to hear whatever arrogance he planned to throw at me next. The phone buzzed in my hand as I swiped to answer. Daniel's voice burst through the line before I even had a chance to speak. "Dad, I assume you got the envelope. You need to send the money this week. The vendors are waiting. Do not delay." His tone was clipped, businesslike, as if he were speaking to a client instead of his father. I held the phone to my ear in silence for a beat, letting him feel the weight of my silence. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, colder than I expected. "Daniel, you banned me from your wedding. Why would you expect me to fund it?" He sighed, the sound heavy with irritation. "Lauren and I agreed it would be better if you did not attend. It is not personal, Dad. It is just optics. You know how her family is. They have standards. But you can still play a role, even if you are not there. Think of this as your way of supporting me." His words settled into the room like a foul odor. Optics, standards, support. He was dressing up exclusion in polished language, as if it would sting less. I gripped the phone tighter. "I supported you your whole life. I gave you more than I had after your mother passed. And now you hand me a bill like I am a stranger. Do you hear yourself?" He exhaled sharply, his patience thinning. "Look, I do not want to argue. We already booked the estate, the caterer, the honeymoon. 75,000 is your part. Just send the check and let us handle the rest. You owe it to me, after everything." The audacity in those words made my jaw tighten. Owe it to him, as if years of sacrifice had been erased and replaced with a single transaction. I forced myself not to shout. "Daniel, if you think you can shame me into this, you are mistaken." He started to speak again, but I cut the line before he could finish. The quiet hum after the call felt heavier than his voice. I set the phone down and stared at the papers spread across the table once more. His arrogance was not just a wound. It was a weapon I could turn back on him. I returned to the laptop and pulled Lauren's profile back up. Post after post showed her parading their plans. A snapshot of the ballroom draped in mock decorations with the caption, "Can, you picture it? Only the best for our day." Another post flaunted a photo of a Santorini villa with infinity pools spilling into the sea. "Counting the days until paradise," she wrote. The arrogance of it burned, but it also provided me with something valuable. She had laid out their timeline in public. I scribbled notes in a pad I kept by the computer. Venue, East Bay Estate. Date, November 15th. Honeymoon, Santorini Villa, fully booked. Caterer, Indigo Catering, specializing in high-profile events. Photographer tagged in her comments. A man named Stephen Caro, apparently one of the best in Charleston. The costs alone told me one truth. They had committed far beyond what Daniel's salary could cover. They were counting on me to bridge the gap. Without my payment, everything would teeter on the edge. I leaned back, thinking of Lauren's smirk last Christmas when she dismissed my food, her whispering into Daniel's ear like a puppeteer. If she was bold enough to flaunt all their details online, then she was bold enough to underestimate me. That was her mistake. They both believed I was too quiet, too old, too bound by guilt to push back. They had no idea how much resolve had been buried beneath the years of silence. I poured myself a glass of water and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the golden leaves of autumn drifting across the sidewalk. My neighbor, Mr. Ellis, was raking his yard, his shoulders hunched against the chill. For years he had waved politely, asked after Daniel when he still lived at home, shared a beer on hot summer evenings. People like him remembered who I was when Daniel was still just a boy, when I carried him to baseball practice, when I fixed the roof of our porch alone after a storm. Those memories were stronger than the disdain Daniel threw at me now. The phone buzzed again on the table. I ignored it. A voicemail followed quickly, but I let it play later when I was ready. For now, I returned to the pad and kept writing. A plan was taking shape, clear and deliberate. If I controlled the money, I controlled the event. If I withheld it, everything Daniel and Lauren built on appearances would collapse. But I would not just sit back and let it unravel naturally. I wanted precision. I wanted to pull threads until their carefully woven tapestry fell apart in front of everyone. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in the dim glow of the lamp, the pocket watch in my hand, and thought back to a storm years ago. Daniel had been 8 when thunder rattled the windows, and he climbed onto my lap in the car, burying his face in my chest. "Do not worry, Dad," he had whispered, his small voice trembling. "You are the strongest." That memory tightened in my chest now. Not as pain, but as contrast. He once believed I was strong. He would learn that again, though not in the way he expected. I pulled out an old file box from under the bed, filled with receipts, contracts, and records from decades of work and bills. Somewhere in those papers were contacts who could help me. Vendors, planners, people who knew my name from years back when I handled engineering work for construction firms around the city. If Daniel thought he could paint me as powerless, he forgot that I had built a life from grit and connections. Near midnight, I sorted through the papers until I found a business card tucked between folders. A planner named Robert Hughes, someone I once helped with a renovation years ago. He had connections in Charleston's event world. The thought sparked like a match. If I could talk to Robert, I could get closer to the vendors. The next morning, I would make the call. As I finally set the file aside and switched off the light, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. Curiosity pushed me to check it this time. Daniel's voice came through, sharper now, edged with impatience. Dad, the planner called me. They need the deposit this week. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. If you care about me at all, you will do the right thing. His words hung in the dark, a hollow attempt at guilt. I set the phone down and lay back, the pocket watch ticking on the nightstand. His desperation was beginning to seep through. That was the first crack, and I intended to widen it until the whole structure fell. The following morning, I woke earlier than usual. The air was sharp with autumn chill as I stepped onto the porch, the sky still a pale gray before sunrise. My coffee steamed in the thermos I carried back inside, the bitterness grounding me. I had slept little, but the restless hours gave me clarity. Daniel wanted me to believe I was cornered. But in truth, he was the one bound by his own commitments. Every invoice in that envelope was a chain tying him to deadlines and vendors who cared more about deposits than pride. All I needed to do was tug at those links. After breakfast, I pulled out the business card I had found the night before. Robert Hughes, event planner. I had helped his firm renovate an office wing years back, installing custom fixtures and drafting safety reports. I doubted he would remember me clearly, but Charleston was not such a big city that old ties faded easily. I dialed the number. The phone pressed warm against my ear. It rang twice before a cheerful professional voice answered. Robert Hughes Events. This is Robert. This is Richard Coleman. We met some years ago when you renovated the Broad Street office space. I handled some of the engineering work. A pause. Then recognition softened his tone. Richard? Yes, I remember. That was a headache of a project. But you kept it on track. What can I do for you? I understand you're not handling Daniel Coleman's wedding, I said carefully. But I imagine you know who is. He chuckled softly. Charleston's wedding world is a small pond. Daniel and Lauren went with East Bay Estate's in-house planner, I believe. A man named Charles Maddox. Very polished, very exclusive. Why do you ask? I hesitated just enough to sound deliberate. Because I am the one footing the bill. At least, that is what Daniel assumes. Before any payments are finalized, I want a meeting. Quietly. I want to know exactly where my money would be going. Robert hummed thoughtfully. Charles is a colleague, not a friend. But I can make an introduction. He has an office downtown. Do you want me to arrange it? Yes, I said, my voice firm. Tomorrow morning, if possible. By the time I hung up, my pulse had steadied. The first thread had been pulled. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing the invoices again, committing each figure to memory. $50,000 for the venue, $15,000 for catering, $10,000 for the honeymoon suite. They had built their castle on air, and without my payment, it would crumble. That night, as rain pattered against the windows, I sat at the table with the pocket watch ticking beside me. Memories came unbidden. Daniel as a teenager, taller than me but still gangly, arguing one night after Elena's death. "If you made more money, Mom could have had better care," he had snapped. I remembered gripping the edge of the counter until my nails bit the wood, swallowing the retort that I had already drained every resource we had. That wound had never healed, and now he reopened it with every word he spoke. I promised myself then, not with heat, but with cold clarity, that he would learn what real responsibility felt like. The next morning, I drove downtown to meet Charles Maddox. His office was tucked into a sleek glass building off King Street, all polished chrome and expensive cologne in the lobby. I felt underdressed in my sweater and slacks, but I carried myself with a steady stride. Charles greeted me with a firm handshake, his smile practiced but not unfriendly. His suit was flawless, his tie knotted with care, the kind of man who measured his success in silk and polish. "Mr. Coleman, a pleasure," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Daniel spoke highly of your contribution. I assume you are here to finalize the payment?" I sat, folding my hands calmly on the desk. "That depends. I want to know precisely what I am paying for, and more importantly, what happens if I decide not to." The question caught him off guard. His smile faltered for the first time. "Well, the contracts are signed, but only partial deposits have been made. Without the remaining funds, the estate cannot guarantee the booking. Vendors require full payment within the next 2 weeks, or services will be canceled. Non-refundable deposits are already in place." Of course, I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. "Did Daniel tell you that I am not invited to this wedding? That I was banned from it?" Charles blinked, his polished exterior cracking slightly. "Banned? No, he never mentioned. He excluded me," I said evenly, my tone like steel. Yet he still sent me a bill as if I were a sponsor, not a father. He expects me to pay $75,000 for an event I cannot attend. Charles shifted, his pen tapping against the desk. "That is unusual. I can assure you, Mr. Coleman, that without your payment, these plans cannot proceed smoothly. But of course, whether you choose to pay is your decision." I let silence hang heavy before I spoke again. "Then here is what you will do. You will halt all progress until Daniel speaks to me directly. If he calls, you will remind him that nothing moves forward without my explicit approval. If he pushes back, remind him that his deposits are already at risk. Make it clear that without me, this wedding teeters on collapse." Charles hesitated, but there was no mistaking the authority in my voice. He finally nodded slowly. "Very well, Mr. Coleman, I will inform him." As I rose to leave, I caught the faintest mutter under his breath. "Arrogant boy." The word struck me like a small spark, fueling my resolve further. Even those working with him saw the cracks in his pride. Outside, the autumn air was cool against my face as I stepped back onto the street. I walked past the line of boutiques and cafes, feeling lighter than I had in years. This was the first move, but not the last. Daniel believed he had me trapped, but in truth, he was dancing on a fragile stage, and I had just pulled away the first support beam. When I returned home, the phone was already buzzing with missed calls. Daniel had left 3 voicemails, his voice growing sharper with each one. The first was polite, almost forced. "Dad, Charles said you had questions. Call me back so we can sort this." The second dripped with irritation. "This is not a game, Dad. Stop making it difficult." The third trembled with panic. "If you do not pay, everything falls apart." Do not ruin this for me." I sat at the table, listening to each one twice, savoring the panic creeping in. The cracks were widening. He thought he was untouchable, but his own pride was turning into a blade against him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I poured myself a glass of wine and stared out the window at the street lamps flickering on. My plan was still forming. But one thing was clear. I could not fight this battle alone. I needed an ally. Someone who knew Daniel's patterns, someone who could help me tighten the noose. One name surfaced in my mind. Paul Mercer, my old colleague from the firm, a meticulous accountant who had seen through many false facades in his career. It had been years since we spoke. But if anyone could help me trace Daniel's steps and uncover his weak points, it was Paul. I reached for my phone and found his number still saved in the contacts. My thumb hovered over the call button, the screen glowing in the dim room. If Paul agreed, Daniel's world would unravel faster than he could ever imagine. I pressed the call button before hesitation could creep in. The line rang twice, then 3 times, before a familiar, steady voice answered. "Hello? Paul, it is Richard Coleman," I said. "It has been a long time." There was a pause, then warmth flooded his tone. "Richard? My goodness, it has been years. How are you?" I let out a low breath. "I have been better. I would not be calling if it were not important." He grew quiet on the other end, sensing the seriousness in my voice. "What is going on?" "It is Daniel," I said simply. "He banned me from his wedding, but sent me a bill for $75,000 to pay for the whole thing. He expects me to cover his venue, his catering, his honeymoon, and now he is pressing me for the money as if I have no choice." Paul let out a whistle. "That sounds like Daniel, all right. I remember when he used to visit the office, strutting around like he owned the place, even though he was barely out of school." "Paul, I need your help," I continued. "You know numbers better than anyone. You know how to follow a trail. I want to know what Daniel is hiding. Because a man on his salary should not be booking estates and luxury honeymoons unless he's counting on my money. If there are debts, shady deals, or anything else, I need to know." Paul was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm. "Richard, after everything you did for me back then, you do not need to ask twice. Come by my office tomorrow morning. Bring whatever paperwork you have. We will take a look." Relief washed through me, though I kept my tone even. "Thank you, Paul. I will see you at 10. When I ended the call, I leaned back in the chair, the weight in my chest loosening just slightly. For the first time in years, I did not feel alone in a fight. The next morning, I carried the thick envelope Daniel had sent me into Paul's office, a modest building tucked off Meeting Street. The smell of strong coffee and printer ink filled the space as I stepped inside. Paul rose from behind his desk, his hair thinner than I remembered, but his eyes still sharp. We shook hands firmly, and he gestured for me to sit. He spread the invoices across the desk, scanning each line with practiced precision. $50,000 for the venue," he muttered. "15 for catering, 10 for the honeymoon. These numbers are outrageous, but they line up with what Lauren has been posting online. Now let us cross-check." He turned to his computer, fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. Within minutes, he had pulled up records, databases, and even LinkedIn posts Daniel had carelessly left public years ago. "He works in software sales now, correct?" Paul asked. "Yes," I said. "He brags about it often." Paul snorted softly. "Salesmen brag, but numbers do not lie. At his level, he is pulling maybe $90,000 a year before taxes. After rent, car payments, and his taste for expensive living, there is no way he has this kind of cash lying around." He tapped a few more keys and frowned. Interesting. I see he took out a personal loan 2 years ago, $20,000 still unpaid. And here, credit card debt, over 30 grand outstanding, minimum payments barely keeping him afloat. The words sank in slowly. So he is already drowning. Paul nodded. He has built his image on borrowed money, flashy clothes, a downtown apartment, dinners in expensive restaurants, all of it stacked on credit. If you had written that check for $75,000, it would not have gone to a wedding. It would have gone to patching holes in a sinking ship, but I felt my jaw tighten as anger mixed with something colder. He looked me in the eye and said I owed him this. He knew he was drowning, and he still tried to drag me down with him. Paul sat back, studying me. What do you want to do, Richard? You came to me for facts, but now you need a plan. I stared at the invoices spread out between us, their crisp lines mocking me. I want to make him face the truth. He has lived on illusions, propped up by other people's sacrifices. He used me when he was younger. He used Lauren's family name to climb. And now he wants to use my money to cover his debts. If he wants a wedding built on lies, I will show him how quickly those lies collapse. Paul leaned forward, lowering his voice. Then you let the vendors know you are not paying. Quietly. And when they press Daniel for the balance, he will have nowhere to turn. I can help you track their timelines, the deadlines for payment, even the penalties. One missed step and the whole house of cards falls. I nodded slowly. And I want records of everything. If he tries to spin this as my fault, I want proof. Invoices, unpaid bills, debts. I want the truth ready to show Paul's mouth curved into the faintest smile. Now that sounds like the Richard I remember. The man who once walked into the office with stacks of reports and caught errors no one else dared to point out. You do not bend easy when you set your mind. We spent the next 2 hours combing through Daniel's public trail. Old business filings where he tried to start a consulting company, dissolving after less than a year with unpaid taxes. Social media posts where he boasted about a new car, likely leased at an absurd interest rate. Even a review thread where a former friend accused him of borrowing money and never paying it back. Each discovery was like fuel to a fire that had been burning quietly in me for years. This was no longer about one insult or even $75,000. This was about a pattern of arrogance, of entitlement that had spread unchecked because no one had stood against it. When I finally stood to leave, Paul clasped my shoulder firmly. I will keep digging. You focus on staying calm. Let him think you are cornered while we watch the walls close in. Back at home, I placed the invoices back in the envelope and slid them into the drawer where I kept Elena's letters. For a moment, I stared at her handwriting on the envelopes, gentle loops and curves, so different from Daniel's cold scrawl. She had believed in raising a son who valued honesty and effort. If she could see him now, demanding money he had not earned, she would weep. But I was not going to weep. I was going to act. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops and cast the sky in bruised colors, my phone buzzed again. Daniel's name lit up the screen, followed by Lauren's. I let them both go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a text arrived. Dad, where is the money? You are cutting it close. Do not embarrass me, embarrass him. The irony nearly made me laugh. He thought the only embarrassment was me sitting quietly in a chair at his wedding. He had no idea that the real humiliation was creeping toward him with every unpaid bill, every vendor waiting for deposits that would never come. The first signs appeared just 3 days later. I was at my kitchen table, the same place where I had stared at Daniel's arrogant invoice, when my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. I let it play. It was the East Bay Estates front office, their tone clipped and professional. "Mr. Coleman, we are calling regarding your son's upcoming event. Our records show that the balance for the venue has not been settled. We need confirmation of payment by the end of the week, or the booking will be released." I listened twice, then pressed save. My lips curved into a small smile as I set the phone down. That was the first domino. Later that afternoon, Paul called. His voice carried a hint of excitement I had not heard from him in years. "Richard, you will want to hear this. I checked with Indigo Catering. They have not received a single payment beyond the small deposit. They gave Daniel until Friday to provide the rest, or they will cancel the contract. And Richard, that deposit is non-refundable." I leaned back in my chair, savoring the words. "So, the clock is ticking." Loudly, Paul said, "He built his whole house of cards on your money. Without it, the walls are already swaying." That night, I sat in the quiet of my living room, the pocket watch ticking steadily beside me, and thought of all the years Daniel had accused me of weakness. He never understood that quiet patience was not weakness. It was discipline. And now, for the first time in decades, that discipline had turned into a weapon. The next day, as I raked leaves from my yard, my neighbor missed her. Ellis walked over, leaning on his rake. "Richard, you hear about your boy?" he asked, his voice low, conspiratorial. I straightened, playing dumb. "What about him?" Ellis smirked. "Word is going around the club. Folks say the estate might cancel his wedding. Payment troubles. Apparently he made a scene with a delivery driver last week, yelling about a crease in some invitations. My wife said it was embarrassing. People are talking. I forced my face to stay neutral. But inside, a small spark flared. Gossip was spreading faster than I expected. "People exaggerate," I said evenly, but Ellis only chuckled. "Maybe so, but pride like that? It catches up to a man. Anyway, you let me know if you need anything. I remember what you did for me when my roof collapsed. You are not alone in this." After he left, I stood for a long time in the yard, the rake hanging limply in my hands. Ellis's words echoed louder than the wind. I was not alone. For years I had carried Daniel's insults quietly, but now even the neighbors were seeing through his arrogance. That evening, I poured myself a glass of red wine and opened my laptop again. Lauren had posted a new photo, her in a dress fitting, surrounded by friends holding champagne flutes. The caption read, "Final touches for the big day." So grateful everything is falling into place, I stared at it, my smile hardening. Everything was not falling into place. It was falling apart, and she was too blinded by her own vanity to see it. Paul called again the next morning. His voice was brisk. "Richard, another crack. The photographer, a man named Caro, posted a vague message online about clients failing to respect contracts. No names, but it does not take much to guess who he means. These vendors talk, Richard. The reputation damage is already spreading." I set my mug of coffee down carefully. "Good. Let it spread. Let them all see that Daniel cannot back his boasts with substance." The following day, the calls began in earnest. First from Daniel, his voice sharp with irritation. "Dad, why have not you sent the money?" The estate called me. They said nothing is confirmed. This is humiliating. Fix it now. I let it go to voicemail. Then Lauren, her tone clipped and icy. "Richard, this is childish. We are building a life together, and you are jeopardizing it because of your pride. Send the money immediately. That one I deleted without saving." By Thursday, Daniel's voice carried a hint of panic. Dad, the florist is threatening to cancel. Do you understand how bad this looks? Everyone will know. Just send the payment and stop dragging this out. I sat at the table, the messages playing in sequence, and for the first time in years, I felt in control. Every demand, every insult they hurled at me only fueled my resolve. That evening, Paul came by the house with a folder. He spread it across the table, pages filled with records he had dug up. Take a look. This is Daniel's financial footprint. He's juggling 5 credit cards, all nearly maxed out. He owes a payday lender $6,000, and here, this one is ugly. He tried to co-sign a lease using your name without authorization. I stopped short of digging deeper because I thought you would want to see this first. The papers blurred for a moment as I stared down at them. He had tried to forge my name. My own son. My hand trembled slightly as I pushed the papers back. So he has not just been reckless. He has been deceitful, Paul nodded. This is bigger than a wedding, Richard. This is a man who believes he can manipulate anyone, even his own father, to cover his mess. I stood slowly, walking to the window where the night pressed against the glass. My reflection stared back at me. Older, lined, but steadier than it had been in years. Then we teach him the truth. He thinks he is building a future, but he is really just building a facade. And I will make sure everyone sees it collapse. Paul closed the folder and tucked it under his arm. I will keep the record safe. If he tries to twist this around, you will have proof. For now, just let the vendors do their work. By next week, the walls will be caving in. As he left, I lingered by the window, the hum of crickets in the yard blending with the faint tick of the pocket watch on the table. My heart felt heavier, but it also beat stronger. This was no longer just revenge. It was justice. The next day, as the sun broke over Charleston harbor, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail, Daniel's voice cracking with something I had not heard from him in years, fear. Dad, please. The estate says they will release our date. Lauren is furious. Her family is starting to ask questions. You cannot do this to me. Please, I listened twice, then saved it alongside the others. His fear was the sweetest proof yet that the plan was working. I replayed that voicemail several times, not because I needed to hear the words again, but because the tone told me everything I needed. Daniel's polished arrogance was starting to crack, the edges of panic creeping through his voice. It was a sound I had never heard from him before, not even as a child. For years he had spoken to me with the certainty of someone who believed he was always owed more. But now that certainty was slipping, and I wanted him to feel every inch of the ground give way beneath him. The following afternoon, Paul arrived at my house carrying another thick folder. He dropped it onto the table, the papers fanning slightly across the wood. Richard, I dug deeper, he said. His eyes were sharper than usual, his jaws set. You were right to suspect there was more. Your son has not only been reckless, he has crossed lines that could get him into real trouble. I opened the folder, scanning the documents. Paul pointed to a set of loan applications. This one, a small business loan. He listed you as a guarantor. Signature line? Forged. And this, credit application for a vehicle lease, again using your information. He submitted it electronically, but it was easy to see where he altered details. My stomach twisted as I stared at the evidence. He had used my name, my credit, my history, all without a second thought. He forged me, I said slowly, the words heavier than I expected. Paul nodded grimly. He is desperate. living far above his means, propping up his image with money he does not have. He figured you would cave, as you always have, and that you would clean up his mess quietly. When you did not, he doubled down. I pushed the papers aside, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. For a moment, anger threatened to boil over, but then I caught the tick of the pocket watch on the table, steady and unbroken. I breathed slowly, letting that sound ground me. If he is willing to forge my name on loans, then this is not just about a wedding. This is about teaching him that choices have consequences. Paul leaned forward. Do you want to press charges? Not yet, I said firmly. That would end everything in one blow, but it would also give him a way to play the victim. No, I want him to face the collapse of his illusions first. I want him to see the wedding unravel before his eyes, to watch everything he built on lies come apart. Only then will he understand the weight of what he has done. Paul studied me for a moment, then nodded. Then we keep building the case, but we hold it in reserve. When he tries to blame you, we will be ready to show the truth. The next day, the cracks widened. Indigo Catering called, leaving a curt voicemail. Due to failure of payment, we regret to inform you that our services are canceled for the Coleman wedding scheduled November 15th. The deposit is non-refundable. We wish you luck securing another caterer on such short notice. I saved the message, then leaned back in my chair, picturing Daniel's face when he received the same notice. Lauren had boasted online about their imported wines and lobster dinners, and now she would have to explain why the tables would be empty. That evening, the phone rang again. Daniel's name lit up the screen, and this time I answered. His voice came through raw, jagged with anger. Dad, what the hell are you doing? The caterer canceled today. Do you understand how humiliating this is? Lauren's family is furious. They are saying we look irresponsible. You caused this. I held the phone steady, my voice calm. No, Daniel. You caused this when you built a wedding you could not pay for. Do not blame me for your decisions. You are sabotaging me. He shouted, his voice cracking. You are ruining everything. After all the years I put up with you, this is how you repay me? You will regret this. His words hung in the silence that followed, sharp and ugly. I clicked the small recorder Paul had given me earlier, ensuring every syllable was captured. When I spoke again, my voice was steady. I am not sabotaging you, Daniel. I am teaching you what happens when arrogance outpaces responsibility. You are pathetic, he spat. You have nothing, and you want to drag me down with you. Lauren is right. You are jealous. The line went dead a moment later, but his accusations lingered in the air. I replayed the recording twice, listening carefully. His words were filled with venom, but underneath there was fear. He was lashing out because he knew he had lost control. By Friday, more pieces were crumbling. Paul called again, his tone brisk. Richard, the florist pulled out. Without the balance, they canceled the order for all floral arrangements. And the photographer posted another vague update about clients failing to pay. But this time, people are starting to connect the dots. Charleston society talks Richard. By the weekend, everyone will know that Daniel and Lauren's wedding is collapsing. That evening, as the sun set behind the marshes, I stood at my kitchen window, sipping a glass of wine while watching neighbors walk their dogs. My phone buzzed again and again on the table, Daniel's name flashing with relentless persistence. I ignored each call, letting them pile up. When I finally listened to the voicemails, his voice was unsteady, frantic. Dad, pick up the phone. We can fix this. Just send the money. You do not understand what you are doing. People are laughing at me. Do you want that? Do you want your own son humiliated? The next message came moments later, Lauren's voice shrill and cold. Richard, this has gone far enough. You are behaving like a child. Do you understand the shame you are bringing on us? Her family is watching, Richard. They think you are sabotaging on purpose. Fix it now, or we will never forgive you. I leaned back, closing my eyes as their voices echoed through the empty kitchen. For years they had dismissed me as weak, as a burden, as someone beneath their glittering circle of success. Now they were begging, their voices tight with desperation. It was a sound I would not forget. Later that night, as rain began tapping lightly against the windows, I sat at the table with Paul's folder open once more. My eyes lingered on the forged signatures, the loans, the debts stacked higher than Daniel could ever manage. I thought of Elena, of the sacrifices she and I had made to raise him, and I felt a pang of sorrow. But then I remembered his voice on the phone, spitting venom, calling me jealous. That sorrow hardened into resolve. The storm outside deepened as I picked up the recorder, checking the files. Each message, each threat, each desperate plea was neatly saved. My arsenal was growing, and Daniel did not even know it. He believed he was still in control, that if he pushed harder, I would fold. But what he could not see was that the collapse had already begun, and soon it would reach a point where even his arrogance could not patch it together. The morning of November 15th arrived gray and damp, the kind of day when the sky pressed low and heavy as if holding its breath. I woke before dawn, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the pocket watch ticking steadily beside me. I had not been invited, of course, but I knew the day's schedule better than Daniel and Lauren did themselves. Thanks to Paul's careful digging, I knew what time the vendors were supposed to arrive, when setup should begin, and when the first guests were expected. And I knew that none of it would unfold as they had planned. At 7 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A message from Paul. The estate manager is furious. No payment. They double-booked the hall. Another event is being set up right now. I read it twice. Then set the phone down slowly, savoring the image. Daniel had promised Lauren a glittering reception at the East Bay estate, chandeliers blazing above white-draped tables. Instead, strangers were walking across their ballroom, unloading crates for someone else's celebration. An hour later, another buzz. Florists left. No arrangements delivered. Photographer pulled out. Word is spreading fast. Attached was a photo Paul had managed to get. Trucks pulling away from the estate driveway, staff shaking their heads. Even in grainy pixels, I could see the frustration etched on their faces. By late morning, the fallout reached the guests. Calls began flooding my phone from numbers I did not recognize. Distant relatives, acquaintances, even neighbors. They were looking for answers, their voices tight with confusion. Richard, is it true the wedding is delayed? We arrived, but there's nothing set up, another voice. They say the estate has no record of a full booking. People are standing outside in the cold. I listened quietly, offering no explanations, only polite deflections. Let Daniel and Lauren explain themselves. It was their circus now. By noon, the picture was clear. Guests arrived dressed in their finest, only to find chaos. Some staff scrambled with folding chairs, others tried to shoo confused onlookers toward the gardens. But there was no string quartet, no plated dinners, no grand ballroom glittering with crystal. Paul's last message confirmed the scene. It is pandemonium. Guests are whispering. Lauren is crying in the hall. Daniel is screaming at the estate manager, threatening lawsuits. I poured myself another cup of coffee and leaned back, letting the warmth seep into my hands. For the first time in years, I felt entirely calm. I had not raised my voice, not lifted a hand, not stormed into their world demanding recognition. I had simply refused to be used. And in that refusal, their carefully crafted illusion was unraveling thread by thread. In the early afternoon, the calls from Daniel began again. I ignored the first three, but the fourth I let play out on speaker while I sat at the table, notebook open. His voice was ragged, almost unrecognizable. "Dad, you have to fix this. The estate is threatening to throw us out. Lauren's family is here. Guests are leaving. People are laughing at us. Do you want me destroyed? Is that what you want?" I let the voicemail save automatically, the green light on the recorder flashing steadily. Another came minutes later, Lauren's voice cracking with fury. "Richard, this is beyond cruel. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. Do you realize what you have done? Her family is mortified. They say you are petty, vindictive. Fix this before it is too late." I took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the bitter taste. Too late had already come and gone. Paul stopped by that evening, his coat damp from the drizzle outside. He set his phone on the table, showing me a string of photos. Guests milling in confusion, some already leaving with umbrellas open, chairs scattered in disarray, a catering truck idling in the drive before turning around and departing. And then one that struck me most. Lauren in her gown, makeup streaked with tears, clutching her bouquet in a half-empty room while Daniel raged at a staff member in the background. I studied it quietly for a long moment before setting the phone back down. He always believed appearances were everything. Today, appearances destroyed him. Paul nodded. The word is everywhere. By tomorrow, all of Charleston will know. His arrogance has finally caught up with him. Night fell, the rain steady outside, and I sat in the silence of my home, letting the day settle. The voicemails had slowed, but the last one came just before midnight. Daniel's voice was raw, broken. "Dad, please. We cannot recover. Everything is ruined. I do not know what to do. Please, I need you." I stared at the screen, the words washing over me, but I did not answer. For the first time in years, the power was not in his hands. It was in mine. It was close to 1 a.m. when the pounding on my front door began. Heavy, frantic, and unrelenting, it echoed through the quiet house like a drumbeat of desperation. I rose slowly from my chair, the pocket watch ticking in my palm, and moved to the door. Through the peephole, I saw them, Daniel and Lauren, standing on the porch under the drizzle. Their hair was plastered wet, their faces pale in the porch light. Lauren's gown peeked absurdly from under her coat, its hem soaked and muddy. Daniel's jaw was clenched, his eyes bloodshot, his tie hanging loose around his neck. I opened the door just enough for the cool mist to spill inside. "What are you doing here?" My voice was calm, even. Daniel pushed forward before I could stop him, water dripping from his sleeves onto the rug. "Dad, let us in." "Please," Lauren followed, clutching her coat tighter around her shoulders, shivering as she stepped into the hallway. I shut the door behind them, the rain muffling into a steady patter outside. The scent of wet fabric and desperation filled the room. Daniel turned on me, his voice sharp but shaky. "The wedding is ruined. The estate threw us out. The caterers never came. Guests left in the rain. Everyone was whispering, laughing. It is a disaster, and it is your fault." I folded my arms across my chest, leaning against the wall. "My fault? You banned me from your wedding. You sent me a bill for $75,000. You tried to use me like an A TM while erasing me from your life. You built this yourself, Lauren's voice cracked as she stepped forward. Richard, listen. It was not supposed to be this way. We only wanted a day that matched our future. Maybe it was wrong to keep you away, but you cannot let this end like this. The honeymoon is paid for. The deposits are gone. Please, help us salvage something. Her tone was softer now, less commanding than the messages she had left earlier. For the first time, she sounded human, not superior. But I had lived too long with their disdain to let pity take hold. Salvage, I said. After years of treating me like I was beneath you, you show up at my door only when you need money. Tell me, Lauren, would I even have been mentioned in your speeches tonight? Or was I always meant to be erased? She faltered, her eyes darting toward Daniel. He bristled, his voice rising. Do not talk to her like that. This is between us. You are my father. You are supposed to support me. I supported you, I said sharply, my voice cutting through his. After your mother died, I worked myself half to death so you could have a future. I sold what I had for your education. I took loans to help you when your first business failed. I gave you every chance, Daniel. And in return, you forged my name on credit applications. You dragged my reputation into your lies. His eyes widened, a flash of recognition before he covered it with anger. You do not know what you are talking about. Paul's folder lay on the coffee table, the documents inside neatly clipped. I tapped it lightly. I know exactly what I am talking about. I have the proof. Do you want me to show it to your guests? To Lauren's family? To the banks you cheated? Do not insult me by pretending it did not happen. Daniel's face drained of color. Lauren's hand flew to her mouth as she looked between us, realization dawning. Daniel, she whispered, is that true? He turned on her, his voice harsh. It is not what it looks like. I just needed leverage. My father. Do not put this on me. I cut in coldly. This is who you are now. A man so consumed with appearances that he built his life on lies. And when those lies crumbled, you came here, expecting me to rescue you. Lauren's composure broke. Tears streaked her cheeks as she backed toward the door, her voice trembling. You lied to me, she said to Daniel. You told me everything was covered. You told me your father was supporting us willingly. All of this, everything, was a lie. Daniel reached for her, but she recoiled, shaking her head. Do not touch me. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of the watch in my hand. Finally, Daniel turned back to me, his anger stripped away, replaced by something smaller, weaker. Dad, please, he said, his voice breaking. I cannot fix this. I am begging you. Help me. I stared at him for a long moment, my heart heavy but unyielding. Help you? I said quietly. You never wanted me at your wedding. You never wanted me in your life unless I was paying for it. You told me I was an embarrassment. You told me I owed you. But now, standing here, dripping water on my floor, you finally see the truth. You owe me, and I am done carrying that debt. His lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. Lauren turned and opened the door, the night air rushing in, cool and sharp. She looked back at me once, her eyes red, then walked out into the rain without another word. Daniel lingered, his shoulders sagging, his pride finally broken. I regret it, he whispered, his voice hoarse. All of it. I stepped aside, pointing to the open door, then live with that regret. He hesitated a moment longer, then followed Lauren into the storm. Their footsteps splashed down the steps, fading into the night until the sound was swallowed by rain. I closed the door slowly, the click of the lock echoing in the quiet house. For a long time, I stood there in the hallway, the scent of rain and wet fabric still lingering. My hands trembled, but not with weakness. For the first time in years, I felt strong, steady, in control of my own dignity. I turned back to the living room, the folder of proof still on the table, the pocket watch ticking beside it. For a long while, I sat in the quiet house, staring at those two objects, the folder that carried the weight of Daniel's lies, and the watch that carried the weight of my family's legacy. One spoke of betrayal, the other of endurance. The contrast could not have been sharper. The rain outside softened to a mist, tapping gently against the windows, and I felt the tension drain from my body in slow, measured breaths. The next morning, the phone calls began again, but not from Daniel. These came from neighbors, acquaintances, and even distant relatives. Word of the ruined wedding had already spread across Charleston like wildfire. Mrs. Hargrove, an old family friend, called first. "Richard," she said gently, "I am sorry for what you went through, but I have to tell you, people are talking. They say Daniel lost everything at the estate yesterday. Guests left, vendors refused to work, and Lauren's family walked out in shame. It is all anyone can whisper about this morning at the club. I thanked her quietly and ended the call. Not long after, another came in from a cousin who had attended. His voice was equal parts disbelief and humor. Richard, it was chaos. People were wandering around in the gardens with no food, no music, nothing. At one point, Daniel was shouting at the estate manager, and Lauren was crying in her gown. Guests started leaving before the ceremony even finished. I am sorry to say it, but it was the most humiliating thing I have ever seen at a wedding. Each call confirmed what I already knew. Their perfect day had collapsed publicly, not quietly. And the more it spread, the more Daniel's carefully polished image dissolved. He had built his reputation on appearances, but now those same appearances were exposing him. By evening, even Ellis, my neighbor, knocked on my door. He leaned on the porch railing, his expression grim but supportive. "Richard, I heard what happened yesterday. Folks around here have long memories. Your boy made a name for himself by acting better than the rest of us, and now it is coming back on him. If you need anything, you have people here." I nodded, the words settling into me like a warm coat on a cold day. For years, I had carried shame that Daniel tried to place on me. But standing there with Ellis, I realized that shame had never been mine to carry. That night, I opened the drawer and pulled out the envelope, the original invoice Daniel had sent me, with its arrogant scrawl telling me to be grateful for the chance to contribute. I fed it into the fireplace, watched the flames curl the paper, blacken the edges, and finally reduce it to ash. The fire crackled softly, warm against my face, and with each flicker I felt another weight lift from my shoulders. Days passed, and the aftermath grew. Paul stopped by to give me updates. "Richard," he said one afternoon, setting a folder on the table, "Daniel's vendors are talking openly now. His reputation is ruined in Charleston's event circles. No one will touch him or Lauren without upfront payment again. And some of his financial records are starting to catch attention. If he does not clean it up, creditors will come knocking." I nodded slowly, the news bringing no joy, only quiet confirmation. "He needed this lesson," I said. "Arrogance can only go unchecked for so long before it eats itself." Paul studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You look lighter, Richard. Like a man who finally put down a burden he has been carrying for years." He was right. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe without the sting of resentment. The house was still quiet, still filled with Elena's absence, but it did not feel as heavy. Dignity had returned, and with it, a sense of peace. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun set over the neighborhood, Mrs. Hargrove called again. "Richard, a group of us are meeting for coffee tomorrow morning. Why do you not join us? After what you did, standing your ground, I think it is time you came back into the circle." I hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The thought of sitting among familiar faces, not as a man defined by his son's arrogance, but as a man who had chosen dignity, brought an unexpected warmth. That night, I set the pocket watch on the table beside me and whispered to the empty room, "Elena, I did what you would have wanted. I stood up, not for pride, but for respect. Our son may hate me today, but maybe someday he will understand." In the days that followed, Daniel did not call again. No texts, no voicemails, no sudden appearances at my door. Perhaps he was too ashamed, or perhaps too stubborn. Either way, I knew the seed of regret had been planted. He had looked me in the eye, standing soaked in my hallway, and admitted it. I regret it. That was his truth, even if he never said another word to me again. And I realized then that revenge was never about destroying him completely. It was about reclaiming myself. For too long, I had let his scorn define me. But now, sitting in my quiet Charleston home with the sound of crickets rising in the yard, I knew the truth. I was no one's burden. I was no one's wallet. I was a man who had given all he had, and I had finally taken back my dignity. The next morning, I joined Mrs. Hargrove and the others at the cafe. Laughter rose around the table, the clink of cups and spoons filling the air. I smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign at first, then natural. Life was moving forward, and for once, I was not looking back in regret. That evening, as the last light faded across the harbor, I raised a glass quietly to the empty room and murmured, "To dignity reclaimed." The watch ticked steadily beside me, carrying my father's, my own, and perhaps even Daniel's future lessons forward. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and tell us your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the screen.